Hi, no, I'm not a pirate. My eye just isn't well. Lately I'm always getting hurt, one thing after another. But nothing compared to what happened to the subject of today's psychological analysis, Charlie Sheen. One of the most famous and highest paid actors on television. He earned up to $2 million per episode in the series 2.5 Men. And by the way, I used to love that show. And after recently watching the documentary that was released about his life, I was really shocked by everything this man did to ruin it.
Charlie's life is cyclical, you know? He usually messes things up badly, hits rock bottom, and then bounces back.
He quickly achieved what many people desire: a successful career, fame, wealth, family, a wonderful woman, 2 beautiful daughters. And he didn't stop until he sabotaged absolutely everything. He ended up fired, divorced twice, with a restraining order involving his 4 children, domestic violence scandals, publicly shunned, infected with HIV. I am
Here to admit that I am indeed HIV positive.
with a very long history of paying for sex, admitted for addictions to various substances, and with amounts that make it surprising he's still alive. In short, a disaster. So today, we're going to analyze what was going through Charlie Sheen's mind. And believe me, even if your story is different from his, there are many things you can learn. So stay until the end. Let's start with his addictive personality. His original name is Carlos Erwin Estevez. He was born in 1965 in New York and was born clinically dead, but they managed to revive him. That's where his middle name Erwin comes from, the doctor who saved him. And actually, that's also where Claudia Nicolasa comes from. I wasn't born dead, but there were some complications that put me at high risk for a few days, and there was a doctor named Nicolas who helped my mother a lot. The name Nicolasa is a symbol of life for me, so if you want, we can talk about it someday. But going back to Charlie, I'm not an expert in perinatal psychology, so I'm just going to touch on this briefly. Some scholars of perinatal trauma talk about what is called the survivor pattern. Adults who unconsciously feel that they shouldn't be here and therefore live with a mix of guilt, defiance, and a sense of urgency about life. A body used to being on alert, that associates calm with danger and seeks intensity or even extreme situations to feel alive. In adult life, that imprint could translate into a constant search for stimulation, risk, and euphoria, as if repeating the original experience of coming back to life over and over again. As I told you, I'm not an expert in this area, but it fits perfectly with the story of her life. And it also fits with his temperament, meaning the personality he showed from a very young age. That's something I can talk to you about with more confidence, authority, and depth. Let's talk about how Charlie's temperament already predisposed him to this addictive behavior, substance use, and abuse. Temperament is that part of personality that is more or less innate, that we show when we are very little, before life and experiences can shape us. It's that material we're made of that we later shape. From the Big 5 model, we can describe Charlie's personality with 5 dimensions: high extraversion, high openness to experience, low conscientiousness or a low sense of responsibility, high neuroticism, and low agreeableness. I'm going to explain how these traits can increase the likelihood of developing addictions. If you're unfamiliar with the Big 5 model and its traits, this 4th Mindhunt Academy course will provide an in-depth class on it. Let's examine each factor, starting with high extraversion. It involves a greater search for social stimulation, inexhaustible social energy, humor, charisma, seduction, and also a tendency toward hedonism, and being present in contexts where there's substance use. Something we know has a huge influence on whether someone ends up using and developing an addiction. I, as an introvert who doesn't like parties, social events, or noise, even though introversion has its own flaws. In this case, it's generally a protective factor against substance use in social settings. On the other hand, we know that very extroverted people are motivated by rewards. That is, they are driven by seeking pleasure, by the good things they can get. But they aren't as motivated by the bad things they can avoid, that is, by punishments or negative consequences. This makes extroverts tend to minimize risks. In colloquial terms, they can sometimes be a bit too optimistic. In terms of neuroscience, extraversion is, overall, an amplifier of the dopaminergic reward circuit. This is also closely related to addictions. Second factor, openness to experience. This trait generates curiosity, a need to explore, a tendency to try new sensations, less moral conformity, a desire to transgress, to think outside the box, feeling that fascination for the unusual, the extreme, and even the forbidden. That intense way of living, wanting to try everything, wanting to taste everything. Obviously, these personality traits are dimensional. And the more pronounced the trait is, the more extreme these behaviors we're describing can be. Third, low conscientiousness or a low sense of responsibility. It makes you more impulsive, so you don't think about the consequences of your actions. You have less self-control, less patience, less organization, worse habits. And it also makes you a bit more short-term oriented. That prioritizing how you feel now and what you want now versus what could happen. Later, if you make that decision, this trait in Charlie will keep getting stronger and stronger because, as we'll see later, despite his harmful and pathological behaviors, he never suffered negative consequences. No one set boundaries for him. Fourth, neuroticism. This can cause the person to turn to substances to regulate themselves externally. Those negative emotions, that discomfort, that anxiety, those negative thoughts. Turning to substances to avoid their discomfort. And fifth, low agreeableness makes you focus more on your own needs and goals rather than the needs and thoughts of other people, which can lead you to act more selfishly and hurt others. In conclusion, analyzing Charlie's childhood personality already reveals a higher tendency towards substance use and addiction. With difficulty being with himself, self-regulating, staying calm, still, and at ease, he needs increasingly intense and extreme stimuli and sensations. If not, he gets bored, feels empty, and doesn't consider the consequences or how he might hurt others. Now that you know what Charlie was made of at birth, let's see how his early life influenced him. Charlie is the son of artist Janet Templeton and actor Martin Sheen, who, by the way, not only acted alongside him in several productions, but also fought for years to save his son from drug addiction. As you can see, Charlie grew up in an environment where talent, fame, and recognition were almost like family currency. Since he was little, he was surrounded by cameras, spotlights, and well-known figures. At home, there was an atmosphere of art, fame, and admiration. His father was a highly respected idol, and his brothers were also going into film. But Charlie, or rather, who back then was still Carlos, remained in the shadows. He was a very bad student, failed everything, very rebellious, impulsive. He didn't even finish high school. I think he was even expelled. But socially, he was charismatic, outgoing, seductive, magnetic, and soon he started going to parties, drinking alcohol. Charlie, in that context of academic failure, decided to pursue the arts, and for that she used the same strategy as her father. Her father, Martin Sheen, was actually named Ramon Estevez, since he had Spanish ancestry, and in Hollywood, a Spanish name at that time might not have been so well accepted. So he used Martin Sheen as his stage name. Charlie, also seeking that acceptance and a guaranteed path to success, adopted this stage surname as well. He decided to go from being called Carlos Estevez to being called Charlie Sheen. And in this way, he symbolically chose to give up his original self, his real self. And he embraced his public persona, his artistic persona. His brother and actor Emilio, on the other hand, kept the last name Estevez, embracing his origins and choosing authenticity, while Charlie chose public validation and the projection of success. And it really worked for him. I'm not going to go over all his performances and successes. What matters to us here is that he basically made it on his first try. He didn't go through that typical process of frustration, of trial and error while trying to reach a goal. He hasn't experienced rejection. He hasn't experienced being told no. He hasn't experienced what it's like to gradually improve, better yourself, grow, and learn. He hasn't experienced what it's like to feel proud of the steps you've taken, your progress, your perseverance. At 18, he decided to become an actor, and just like that, he made it big. By the age of 25, he had already filmed two very famous movies, Platoon and Wall Street, and had already established himself as a leading actor. But soon he started to be known not only for his work, but also for his scandals. The media talked about his wild parties, his turbulent relationships, sex scandals, his intense drug use, and his repeated stints in rehab.
A ton of it. Alcohol, acid, poppers, ecstasy.
In that life of excess, he wasn't just putting his image and public reputation at risk, but he was also endangering his work as an actor. Arriving late to shoots, missing rehearsals, showing up drunk or high, as if in a way his job didn't matter to him. And from a psychological point of view, getting what you want so easily and so quickly, even though it's something we would all wish for, because nobody likes to go through that tough stage where reality hits, this can actually be something dangerous. Because if you don't go through that stage, that place of difficulty, uncertainty, and rejection, the truth is that this can actually be something dangerous. You don't have a mental image of what you have is worth, of what it costs, and of what you would lose if you lost it. And that's a reality. When something hasn't cost us any effort to get, we generally treat it with less respect and care. Another actor would have had to go through a hard time to get what Charlie had. He probably would have held back much more for fear of losing what he had achieved.
Did that make you think you could do whatever you wanted? Maybe unconsciously.
But not Charlie. In Charlie, he developed the sense that it was simply there, something intrinsic to him that didn't really depend on what he did. He didn't experience fear of losing it because he hadn't really earned it. But there's a much deeper and more interesting explanation for this self-destructive behavior. Some people close to Charlie say that it seemed like the more successful he became and the happier he could be, the more he seemed to look for ways to sabotage it, like an urge to lose control, to break what he had just built, as if he didn't feel worthy of what he had, as if deep down he actually had a lot of hidden insecurities inside him. For example, his self-destructive behaviors got much worse shortly after he married a wonderful woman, had 2 daughters, and starred in a successful TV show. At the best moment of his life is when we see him show his worst side. This is a classic pattern of self-sabotage, where the person unconsciously destroys what they want most, not because of a lack of ability, but because success comes into conflict with the internal self-image. There is a dissonance between the real self and the ideal self. If I perceive myself internally as unworthy, flawed, worthless, or bad, when external reality offers me success, admiration, or love, it creates an unbearable conflict. The mind may then try to restore that coherence, even if it means destroying itself. This is very common in people with narcissistic traits and borderline traits, in whom there is usually a deep unconscious shame. The feeling that one is fundamentally damaged or doesn't deserve to be loved if they show themselves as they truly are. When the environment offers recognition, affection, and stability, that inner voice appears. This isn't going to last. If they really knew what I'm truly like, they would leave. Before they leave or reject me, I destroy it myself. But also, this self-sabotage gives a sense of control. If I destroy it first, I decide how and when it ends. They don't catch me off guard, they don't abandon me, I get ahead of it. If I'm going to lose, I'd rather it be by my own hand. And if you notice, we're starting to talk about low self-esteem, fear of rejection, and feeling inadequate. Charlie admits that since he was a child, he compared himself a lot to his great father and his brothers, and that his real goal was to become more famous than his father. But of course, while his father worked hard to earn his place in Hollywood, he, as his father's son, born among cameras and spotlights, takes his last name, goes out into the world, and conquers it. Maybe, in his mind, Charlie was never up to his father's level, the father he admired so much and whose stage surname and identity he had adopted. But also, there isn't a self beyond the one that's between spotlights and cameras. Because very early on, I gave up that real identity, that Carlos Estevez, to become Charlie Sheen. And deep down, I feel like I don't deserve to be there, I don't deserve to be Charlie Sheen. So if I'm no longer Carlos Estevez, but I also don't deserve to be Charlie Sheen, I'm nobody. I really have nothing. There isn't a personal self beyond the character. How am I supposed to stop acting like the character if there's no other alternative? So we see this identity conflict between the real self and the actor self. Famous, admired, glorified. In fact, if you notice, in the documentary, many times Charlie talks about himself in the third person, because he's talking about the character, not about himself. Well, the truth is that Charlie's temperament has a predisposition to substance use, and we can detect some borderline and narcissistic traits. That chronic feeling of emptiness, that identity conflict, that constant comparison, that need for admiration to feel valuable. All of this already sets the stage for disaster to happen. And in fact, everything I just mentioned is a pretty common background in these profiles. Celebrities who become famous very quickly don't know how to handle it, and soon they develop pathological behaviors, excesses, and substance use. In this case, remember, we're not talking about some celebrity who gets a little out of control, but about someone with a serious level of substance use. Deadly, who has had relationships with hundreds of people, who has reached a level of public self-destruction that I don't know if we've seen in other celebrities. So what is the decisive factor in Charlie Sheen's decline? The lack of consequences.
I ended up losing respect for the idea that things really have consequences.
In the very first movie he acted in, when he was 18, he fell asleep on the day he was supposed to film. And not only did they not scold him, but even though he only appeared for a few minutes in the whole movie, he was praised for it. In all his acting jobs, he was unreliable, arrived late, or didn't show up, or came drunk. He had conflicts with his colleagues, with his bosses, always surrounded by a lot of scandals. But despite the headlines, his career never stopped. In fact, his bad boy reputation became his personal brand. Hollywood forgave him time and time again because the studios knew that his presence guaranteed an audience and money, and he knew it too. So he felt powerful, special, entitled to privileged treatment. The rules that applied to ordinary people didn't apply to him. Even the police forgave him for actions that could have landed him in jail. He even piloted commercial airplanes with passengers.
But I was already half drunk. I had, I don't know, 4 or 5 or 6 shots. And I started piloting the plane.
I was drunk. He crashed cars, destroyed hotels, carried illegal substances and weapons, hired prostitutes, and had domestic violence charges disappear. In short, he had immunity from a large number of crimes. And far from being rejected or punished socially or professionally, in his most scandalous moments, he received a $2 million per episode contract on the series 2.5 Men. He didn't do it gradually.
He immediately won the audience. We nailed it from the start.
And this is something extremely dangerous. When someone in the public eye not only doesn't get punished, but actually receives even more fame and admiration for their pathological behavior, the lesson it teaches reinforces the behavior. You are invincible, you are omnipotent, you can do and say whatever you want, this path is right, it's your path to success, you always act correctly, you're right, don't listen to anyone. Basically, it's a factory for narcissistic egos, especially for someone who is not only addicted to substances, but also to social validation. However, over the years and with these behaviors, Charlie gradually lost his charisma, his magnetism. The addictions were taking more and more control of him. And at that point, it was already hard to tell what was part of his personality, what was part of the addiction, or what was a consequence of the physical effects of that lifestyle. That empathy fades away, cognitive functions deteriorate, even more self-awareness is lost, and frustration, discomfort, and anger start to take over. It's hard to change direction or correct yourself when your emotions are numb. According to Charlie, as his life goes on, we can see how substances, instead of being about seeking extreme sensations, became a refuge, a way to numb his pain, his shame, his guilt. In fact, we can see how he went from using socially at parties to doing it alone in his room, with a bodyguard watching outside, or asking his dealer to come to his house to watch TV while they used. We see that the psychological function of the substances shifted from pleasure to silence. It's as if the substances were his safe place, something that's always there, that's predictable, that he can control, that doesn't judge him. And little by little, he starts to choose substances over people. And that's how he would stay, as long as his actor self, his successful self, allowed him to keep living that way, disconnected from his emotional reality. In 2011, however, the first limits were finally set, and the breakdown began. He was finally fired from 2.5 Men because of the number of scandals. I really liked the show, so when it suddenly disappeared and then they brought in Ashton Kutcher, as a viewer, I didn't like it at all. But as a psychologist, I see that it was something completely necessary. However, it was already too late to set boundaries. Charlie's alter ego had already grown, he had started seeing himself as godlike and had developed strong narcissistic traits, and his reaction was explosive. He lashed out at the producer, said that the show was crap, that it had never been up to his standards. He started a solo media tour that became a worldwide spectacle. He gave frantic interviews, talked about having tiger blood, that a normal brain can't understand him, that he has superior cognitive abilities.
He said he had tiger blood, man.
He described himself as a superior being, as someone unstoppable. He proclaimed his omnipotence, called himself rock star from Mars. He was very talkative, seemed very agitated, very nervous. He wasn't sleeping, and his behavior was disorganized. Some suggested that Charlie might have bipolar disorder and that he was in a manic phase. But, as I told you before, at this point in his life, it was already hard to tell what was Carlos Estevez, what was Charlie Sheen, what was addiction, and what were the organic effects of his actions. But overall, this behavior that emerged in Charlie can be understood as a manic defense against unbearable shame. When he feels like he's losing value or power, what he does is put himself above everyone else. I'm not sick, nobody understands me because I'm superior. And pay attention to the word I used, manic. That is, you can already see a certain level of ego, a break from reality, something extremely common when we're talking about substance use.
Every day we think, will today be the day we lose him?
And the thing is, Charlie was not only disconnected from his emotional reality, avoiding and shutting off his emotions, but now he was also a bit disconnected, I don't know to what extent, from external and tangible reality. He wasn't aware of what he was saying, he did things that didn't make sense, sometimes people laughed at his behavior, he was a walking meme and he took that as something prestigious. In short, it was the life collapse of one of Hollywood's most popular figures. And of course, the public kept reinforcing it. Like I told you, the internet turned him into a meme, his crazy phrases went viral, he was the most followed person on Twitter, and TV networks kept interviewing him as if he were a walking spectacle. No matter how much he sank, Charlie Sheen was still profitable. Charlie was becoming more and more degenerate, more disorganized, sicker, and even more pitiful. And little by little, the applause started turning into boos. The audience got tired of his ramblings, his tours made no sense, and eventually criticism and social rejection came. And as often happens, the best opportunities come after breakdowns and crises. Many people, especially those with borderline narcissistic structures, only achieve that insight, that realization, when their environment finally confronts them with a real limit. A job loss, a breakup, the loss of a loved one, an illness, a reputational crisis, anything that for years allowed you to remain in that state of denial. And now, since it has fallen apart, since it has disappeared, you have to face the emptiness and start changing the way you were functioning. The turning point came then in 2015. Charlie Sheen appeared on television to reveal that he was HIV positive.
This is your first time publicly discussing having sex with men and all the craziness.
He confessed that for years he had been blackmailed to keep his secret hidden, but he was exhausted and wanted to make it public. We see a very different attitude in this interview, and it's the first moment where he shows himself as vulnerable and real, and Charlie said he felt very relieved after revealing his secret. Since then, he began a gradual process of stepping away from the media spotlight. In psychological terms, he began to let go of this narcissistic alter ego, this bold media persona he had created, and he began to reconnect and repair his real identity, his personal life. But he realized that this process was incompatible with maintaining his substance use habits. And little by little, he started to detox, and that's when he came face to face with reality. And what reality? 2 divorces, having missed his children's childhood, having been given a restraining order keeping him away from them, contracting HIV, suffering social humiliation. His family and friends, although they never gave up and always fought and stayed by his side, had obviously suffered a lot during all those years. A lot. Something that Charlie, until then, I think he wasn't fully aware of. Because the amount, both in terms of the variety of substances and the doses he took every day, completely destroys his ability to perceive reality as it is. Of connecting with your own emotions, of realizing what's happening around you. Suddenly, Charlie becomes aware of the harm he has caused his loved ones. And finally, he connects with the guilt. All that guilt, that shame, that low self-esteem, those fears, which for decades had been numbed with substances and narcissistic defenses, suddenly come to light. Something that can be tremendously painful, but it's positive because it acts as a powerful internal punishment. If I connect with the guilt of my actions, it's more likely in terms of learning that I won't do it again. And maybe this is the reason why Charlie, to this day, has been sober for 7 years. We see that the key to being able to stay away from those substances and those excesses was, first, having given up that alter ego that was magnified by fame and public acclaim. And in the documentary, I sensed a dissociation in Charlie. He talks about himself in the third person, as if those horrible acts were done by someone else. But we also see a lost look, a confused face. Someone who is just starting to understand what has happened. Some emotions that are perhaps still a bit muted or disconnected from the story. Like something is turned off or dead inside him. I sense a bit of that feeling of suddenly waking up. And feeling that until now, someone else had been controlling your body, your mind, and your decisions, and you were there and you were aware of what was happening, you saw it. But from a distance, as if you weren't identifying with what you've done. It seems that currently Charlie Sheen, or Carlos Estevez, is trying to redeem himself and repair the damage from everything he has done. And it seems that he has found what he'd been seeking since his first day of life, finding a different way to feel alive, without needing to challenge death, to live without needing to die first. Like most life stories, full of pain, darkness, and trauma, all of this could have been avoided if he had gotten good therapy in time. Back then, going to a psychologist was pretty unusual. Even if you had a lot of money, it wasn't common to go to a psychologist or talk about it. But nowadays, anyone would have understood that what this man needed was therapy. If you feel that you or a loved one could benefit from psychological support, you already know that at Esta Contigo Terapia, we finance your therapeutic process with no interest or hidden fees, so that money isn't a problem when it comes to accessing deep, high-quality, evidence-based therapy. I'll put the link in the comments so you can book your first free session. And if you have any questions, you can also leave them in the comments, or on the website there's a WhatsApp button where we can help you with any concerns. I hope you enjoyed the analysis, learned something, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.